The air in Savannah hung thick with humidity, carrying the scent of the river, the moss-draped oaks, and the whispers of the city's secret trades. In the marketplace near Bay Street, merchants hawked sugar, cotton, and the newest acquisitions from the interior plantations. But among all the goods, there was one commodity that drew attention far beyond its price tag, a slave woman whose beauty was whispered about even before she had been displayed. Her name was Isabeau, though few would call her by it aloud. Eyes that seemed to hold the warmth of the summer sun, lips shaped like the curve of the river bend, and skin the color of ripened chestnut, she moved through the crowds with a quiet confidence that left merchants and buyers alike unsettled. Men lingered longer than they should, drawn not merely to her appearance but to the aura of intelligence and determination that clung to her as tightly as her worn cotton dress. Women, on the other hand, glanced at her with suspicion, envy, and an unspoken recognition that this woman, this slave, had power in ways most did not understand. It was 1844, and Savannah's streets teemed with commerce, intrigue, and the hidden violence of human bondage. Isabeau had been brought from a plantation upriver, purchased in a trade of sugar and goods, and displayed on the auction block with precision meant to provoke desire. Yet, she did not display fear. She did not bend beneath the gaze of strangers. She stood tall, chin lifted, eyes scanning the crowd, lips slightly curved in a knowing smile. There was a quiet defiance in her posture, a signal to anyone who looked closely. She was more than what the auctioneer proclaimed her to be. The auctioneer, a short man with a booming voice, began the sale with the usual parade of exaggeration and bravado. Ladies and gentlemen, finest blood, strongest limbs, intelligence beyond her years, and beauty to rival the roses of France. His gestures toward Isabeau seemed almost comical, but she remained still, her gaze fixed on the river, unbroken, untouchable. Bidders circled, murmuring to each other, calculating, speculating, craving what they could not fully possess. One man, a wealthy planter from the outskirts of Savannah, leaned forward, his fingers drumming impatiently. "She is exactly what I need for my household," he whispered to his companion. Intelligence, obedience, and that face could silence the will of a dozen men. Isabeau caught the words, though she did not react outwardly. Inside, a storm brewed. She had been sold before, moved from plantation to plantation, each new master believing they could command her, believing that beauty and wit were weaknesses to be exploited. But she had learned the subtle arts of observation, patience, and hidden defiance. Her beauty was a weapon, yes, but her mind was the true instrument of control. Every glance, every smile, every careful gesture was a calculation. When the bidding began, hands shot up in rapid succession, eager to claim what many called the most desirable slave in Savannah. The price climbed quickly, higher than any she had seen in her years on the market. But Isabeau remained unmoved, knowing that the highest bidder did not always understand the cost of what he sought to own. She understood her own worth, far beyond the coins clinking into the auctioneer's chest. Finally, the hammer fell. A man named Jonathan Cray, a prominent planter with estates along the Savannah River, claimed her. The crowd murmured, some with envy, some with relief that the competition was over. Jonathan strutted to her, an air of ownership in every step, expecting submission, expecting awe, expecting to bend her to his will. But Isabeau walked beside him as though she were the one leading, not following, her chin high, her eyes meeting his with the faintest hint of challenge. As they left the auction block, she passed close to a cluster of onlookers. Whispers followed her like a shadow. "Have you seen her eyes?" one woman murmured. "They're alive, dangerous even." Another man gritted his teeth. "She looks like she already knows 1,000 secrets we'll never understand." Isabeau heard them all and allowed herself a quiet smile. She had survived countless auctions, countless owners, and countless assumptions about her weakness. She knew that her beauty, her allure, was only a part of the story. What no one knew, and what Jonathan Cray would soon discover, was the fire within her, a mind as sharp and unyielding as the Savannah River's currents. That night, as she was led to the Cray estate, She glanced at the moonlit streets, the Spanish moss swaying in the humid breeze, and felt the weight of opportunity and danger intertwined. Her life had been dictated by others for too long. And yet here, in this house of wealth and expectation, she recognized the chance to shape her destiny, to turn the tools of her bondage into instruments of control. She was no longer just the most beautiful, she was strategy, patience, and quiet vengeance waiting for its moment. The first night at the Cray estate would test her limits in ways she had not yet imagined. The household was large, filled with curious eyes, malicious whispers, and the latent threat of violence. But Isabeau did not flinch. She had endured the world's greed, its lust, its cruelty. She would endure it still, and she would ensure that she remained untouchable, untamed, and ultimately untethered by the very chains others believed bound her. And so began the saga of the most irresistible slave woman ever sold in Savannah. A story not just of beauty and desire, but of intellect, cunning, and the quiet but undeniable power of one woman who refused to be defined by the expectations of others. As the candlelight flickered across the polished floors of the Cray mansion, Isabeau's eyes gleamed with a certainty that would come to shape the lives of everyone she encountered. The Cray estate loomed like a silent fortress against the darkening sky, its wide verandas wrapped in creeping vines and lanterns flickering like watchful eyes. As Isabeau stepped through the iron gates, she felt the hush that fell over the grounds, not of peace, but of scrutiny. Servants paused mid-task. House slaves exchanged quick glances. Every gaze lingered on her, assessing, judging, prying. Jonathan Cray walked ahead of her with the swagger of a man certain of his latest acquisition. He didn't notice the shift in the air around them, the tension that followed her like a trailing veil. But Isabeau noticed everything. She had learned long ago that a new household was a battlefield disguised as a home. Inside, the house smelled of polished wood, lilac perfume, and expectation. A woman appeared at the top of the staircase, Jonathan's wife, Evelyn Cray. Tall, slender, with golden hair twisted in an elaborate braid. She looked like a portrait painted to intimidate. Her eyes locked on Isabeau with a chill sharp enough to slice skin. "So this is the one?" Evelyn asked, voice steady but taut. Jonathan nodded, too pleased with his purchase to sense his wife's irritation. "Best bid I've made all year. She'll bring order to the house. Intelligent, strong, pleasant to look at." The last sentence landed like a slap in the silent hallway. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Isabeau dipped her head respectfully, not submissively. A precise angle, calculated. Evelyn noticed. She seemed unsettled by the mixture of grace and boldness, radiating from the woman her husband had purchased like fine china. "You will report to the house matron, Mrs. Daltrey," Evelyn said, her voice smooth but sharpened. "She will assign your duties. See that you do them without theatrics." Isabeau nodded again, but inside she felt that familiar spark, the one that rose whenever someone underestimated her. "Yes, ma'am," she replied softly, voice warm as honey, steady as stone. Evelyn blinked. She had expected tremor, fear, or desperation. Not this. Mrs. Daltrey, a stern older woman with a pinched mouth, wasted no time setting rules. "You will attend the mistress's chambers in the mornings, the dining hall in the evenings, and assist with receiving guests. You're to speak only when spoken to, no lingering in doorways, no unnecessary smiles, and absolutely no interaction with the master unless directly instructed." "Oat." Isabeau listened carefully. She agreed to every rule with the obedient nod Mrs. Daltrey demanded. But beneath her calm exterior, she was already mapping the house, the people, the weak spots. Her room, if one could call it that, was a small space near the laundry. She placed her few belongings neatly, smoothing her blanket, adjusting the tiny window shutter to let in slivers of moonlight. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed and listened. Footsteps, whispers, the creak of floorboards. This house breathed secrets, and she would learn every one. The next morning, she rose before dawn and made her way to Evelyn's chambers. The mistress sat at her vanity, brushing her long hair with mechanical strokes. The mirror reflected Evelyn's eyes, meeting Isabeau's through the glass, sharp, searching, guarded. "You move quietly," Evelyn said. "I try to, ma'am." Isabeau answered. Where did you come from? Upriver, ma'am. Do you know how to read? Isabeau lowered her gaze. A little. The truth was, she read well. But one did not reveal all their strengths. They had not yet measured their enemy. Evelyn studied her for a long, silent moment. You're very composed. Isabeau smiled faintly. I find it helps, ma'am. Evelyn set the brush down abruptly. Do not mistake my civility for fondness. My husband buys things without considering how they disrupt this household. I will not have trouble from you. No trouble, ma'am, Isabeau said. I only wish to serve where needed. Her tone was humble, but her eyes held something dangerous in tension. Resolve, a hidden flame. Evelyn flinched before she could mask it. That afternoon, Isabeau passed through the main hall carrying linens when she overheard Jonathan speaking to a guest. Pretty thing, isn't she? He boasted. The guest chuckled. Your wife must be furious. She'll manage, Jonathan replied carelessly. This one's special, I can tell. Isabeau walked past them without so much as a turn of her head, but the words etched themselves into her thoughts like a promise. Not of fear, not of suffering, but of opportunity. By nightfall, the entire house buzzed about her, the new woman, who walked like she owned sunlight, who never spoke out of turn, who stirred both desire and unease. She lay awake on her narrow cot, listening to the river outside. She knew she had entered a world ruled by fragile pride and hidden threats, but she also knew something else, something she had felt from the moment she stepped inside the Cray estate. This house was already cracking. She had only to decide where to press. The Cray estate rose from the earth like a monument to vanity, its white columns towering, its balconies draped with curling ivy, its windows gleaming like unblinking eyes. The ride up the long gravel path felt too quiet, too heavy, as though even the moss-covered oaks bowed in anticipation. Isabeau had seen grand houses before, but none that seemed to breathe with such self-importance. Everything about the place declared its master, wealthy, prideful, always watching. Jonathan Cray walked ahead of her, chest pushed forward as though parading a prize. The other slaves at the carriage steps stopped mid-task to stare. Some widened their eyes in admiration, others narrowed theirs in warning. Isabeau kept her gaze steady, her posture relaxed but alert. She had learned early in life that a new household was like entering a battlefield you do not charge in with force. You observe where the shadows fall. Inside, the foyer was over-polished and over-perfumed. Portraits of Cray's ancestors lined the walls. Stern men with powdered wigs and women whose expressions were carved into permanent disapproval. Their eyes seemed to follow Isabeau as she crossed the marble floor. Cray snapped his fingers at an older house slave. Mary, this is the new one. Show her the routine. I expect her ready by sunrise. Mary did not speak, only nodded. Her eyes were flat, unreadable, like water with no reflection. She motioned for Isabeau to follow. The deeper they walked into the house, the more Isabeau felt the tension woven into its rooms. Servants moved swiftly. Nobody lingered. Nobody laughed. Every whisper seemed swallowed before reaching the air. This was not just a household, it was a machine, running with silent precision. Mary finally stopped in a dim hallway near the servant quarters. You sleep here, she said, her voice rough as stones. The room was small but clean. A narrow bed, a wooden crate for clothes, and a single window too high to see out of. Isabeau turned to Mary. Is there something you wish to tell me? Mary's jaw tightened. For a moment she said nothing then. She leaned in close enough for Isabeau to feel her breath. You're pretty. Too pretty for your own good, she whispered. Women like you. This house eats them faster than any field ever has. Before Isabeau could respond, Mary walked away. Later, Isabeau was brought to the kitchen to help with supper. The room buzzed with uneasy energy. A young girl, perhaps 12, darted close to her. You're her, ain't you? The girl whispered. The one they say made the whole market stop still? Isabeau smiled softly. People say many things. The girl's eyes sparkled with mischief and pity. Mrs. Cray gonna hate you. Isabeau paused. Mrs. Cray? A few slaves exchanged looks. Nobody spoke. The silence said enough. As the evening rolled into night, Isabeau moved through her tasks with precise grace, sizing up every corner of the Cray household. She noticed how the butler flinched whenever Cray raised his voice. She saw how the cook stiffened whenever the mistress's footsteps approached. She noted the servants who avoided her and the ones who watched her too long. She also learned the rhythm of the house: who slept late, who rose early, who locked which door, who carried keys. Knowledge was currency. She collected it quietly. When night fell fully, Mary returned to show her the upstairs corridors she'd be expected to clean. The candle Mary carried flickered weakly in the long hallway. The air felt colder there, heavier. At the far end was the master bedroom. Mary lowered her voice. "Avoid that door unless summoned, and pray you are not summoned often." Isabeau gave her a level look. "I do not fear men like him." Mary stared long at her. Then her face softened, but only barely. "Child, it ain't his anger you should fear. It's his fascination." Well, less. Isabeau felt a shadow pass her thoughts, but she refused to let it settle. As they moved, a sudden sharp sound cut through the hall, the slam of another door. A woman's voice hissed from behind it, low and trembling with fury. "That thing better stay away from my corridor, Jonathan." Mrs. Cray. Isabeau did not see her, but she felt the burn of the mistress's hatred as surely as heat from a fire. It was not jealousy of beauty alone. It was territorial, violent, personal. Mary's hand gripped Isabeau's arm, pulling her back into the shadows. "Now you see," Mary whispered. "This house watches, it judges, and it punishes." Isabeau's heart did not race. Instead, it steadied, sharpened. "I have lived through punishments," she replied, "and I have survived them all." Mary searched her face as though trying to decide whether Isabeau was naive or dangerous. When Isabeau finally lay down in her small bed that night, the house creaked around her. The wind rustled the high branches outside. Somewhere above her, Mr. and Mrs. Cray argued in muffled tones. Somewhere deeper in the house, a door closed quietly, too quietly to be innocent. Isabeau stared at the ceiling until her eyes adjusted to the dark. She had been bought. She had been brought here like a possession. But this house, with all its power and all its secrets, was not prepared for her. She would not simply endure it. She would learn it, master it, turn it on itself. And one day, whether through cleverness, alliances, or the soft power of beauty, Isabeau would own the destiny they believed they had purchased. Savannah woke restless the next morning, whispering the same name as though it were a spell, Delilah. Her arrival had not simply stirred curiosity. It had unsettled something older, deeper, threaded into the bones of the coastal city. By sunrise, women who had never once attended the slave market found excuses to pass through it. Men who claimed disinterest suddenly lingered near the auction block. Every visitor left with the same impression. Delilah was too beautiful, too composed, too otherworldly to belong to any man. Jonathan Bellamy, however, was already awake before dawn, pacing the length of his parlor like a man expecting ghosts. He had spent half the night replaying the moment Delilah lifted her gaze toward him, calm, steady, neither pleading nor hardened. He had purchased dozens of slaves in his life, but none had ever looked at him as though she were silently taking his measure. When he finally stepped into the hallway, he found Clara waiting for him, arms folded, chin raised. She had not slept at all. "Where is she?" Clara demanded. "In the east chamber," Jonathan answered, brushing past her. She needed rest. Clara followed him like a shadow. "That woman will destroy this household." Jonathan sighed, exhausted. "She is a servant, Clara. Nothing more." Clara's lips tightened. "Then why did you pay such a price?" He hesitated, not because he doubted the decision, but because he could not explain it. Something in Delilah's silence had struck him harder than any scream. She carried sorrow like a perfume, heavy, ancient, and it clung to the air around her. Before he could answer, a soft voice drifted from the end of the hall. "I did not mean to cause trouble." Both turned. Delilah stood framed in the doorway of the east chamber, wrapped in simple cotton. The morning light behind her shaped her hair into a loose halo of gold. She looked neither intimidated nor bold, simply present, as though she knew she belonged wherever she stood. Clara bristled. Jonathan inhaled slowly. "You should be resting," he said. I rest enough, Delilah replied. Shall I begin work? Jonathan nodded, but Clara stepped between them. You will take orders from me. Every one of them. Delilah lowered her eyes, though her voice remained steady. Yes, ma'am. Clara walked away, satisfied. Jonathan lingered a second longer, studying Delilah as one might study a painting whose brushstrokes held a secret message. There is something different about you, he murmured. Delilah did not deny it. So I have been told. She moved past him, her steps quiet, her expression unreadable. By midday, whispers spread through the Bellamy household. Delilah worked with unnatural precision, sweeping every corner, arranging every item exactly as it had been before touching it. Even the older servants found themselves staring, unsettled not by her beauty but by her presence. She did not hum, did not complain, did not sigh. She worked as though her thoughts lived somewhere far beyond the walls of the estate. In the kitchen, Ruth, the head cook, watched Delilah fold linens with exacting grace. Child, Ruth said quietly, you from here? No. In the Loteng, you got family. Delilah hesitated. Once, Ruth softened. You don't gotta tell me, but be careful. Pretty don't live easy in houses like this. Delilah gave a faint, tired smile. I learned that long ago. At dinner, Jonathan noticed Clara's sharp glances toward the doorway each time Delilah appeared to serve a dish. Clara watched him too, suspicious and simmering. Stop staring at her, Clara whispered under her breath. Jonathan stiffened. I'm not staring. You look at her like she's a portrait you might buy. He didn't respond. Across the room, Delilah poured wine into a crystal glass. Jonathan caught her reflection in the polished silver tray she held. Her eyes lifted for only a heartbeat, but it was enough. Enough for him to feel the same chilling sense he'd felt the night of the auction. She is hiding something, and that secret is why she was worth more than any woman ever sold in Savannah. Later, the sky drenched the plantation in indigo. The frogs began their nightly chorus. The house quieted except for Jonathan, who found himself wandering toward the east corridor again. Delilah was at the window, staring out at the fields. She did not turn when he entered. You're awake, he said softly. I do not sleep easily. Jonathan stepped closer. What keeps you awake? Delilah exhaled slowly. Memories. And the knowledge that memories can return, even when we pray they do not. He swallowed. Delilah, who owned you before the auction? She didn't turn. But the air changed tense, electric. That is a story, she whispered. Men pay far more than money to hear. Yes, Jonathan's pulse quickened. I am asking not as your master, but as someone who wants to protect you. At last, she faced him. Her eyes were shadowed with something quiet and terrifying. Then you should know the truth, she said. The man who owned me before is not finished with me. Jonathan felt the chill move through his spine. Who was he? Delilah stepped into the moonlight, her face carved with dread. The most powerful man in Savannah, she answered, and the reason I was sold at a price no woman should ever command. Savannah, 1844. By the time the lamps were lit across the estate, Anthea realized something unsettling. Everyone was watching Saraphene, but Saraphene was watching everyone else, not as a frightened young woman, not as a submissive slave, but as someone taking careful, methodical note of every weakness around her. Women envied her. Men wanted her. Children stared at her like she wasn't real. And yet, Anthea noticed, Saraphene never reacted. The girl only observed, storing faces, gestures, habits, and flaws as if each one was a stepping stone on a path she'd already mapped. Anthea felt it in her bones then. Saraphene had not come to Savannah to be owned. She had come with a purpose. That evening, the Marshall family held a formal supper to display their new acquisition as if she were a prized gem. The guests arrived, dripping in wealth. Silk shawls, pearl combs, gold pocket watches, and egos too large to fit through the doors. Saraphene walked in wearing nothing but a plain blue dress, the one Anthea stitched that morning. Yet the room froze. The conversation died. The forks halted mid-air. The wives stiffened. The husbands swallowed hard. No painting on the Marshall walls could compare to the girl standing silently at the foot of the table. Mrs. Alden, Savannah's most vicious gossip, finally spoke. My word. She's well. She's unnatural. Anthea bristled. Saraphene only lifted her chin. Mr. Alden coughed awkwardly. Where did she come from again? Elias lied smoothly. A plantation near the Carolinas. Owner let her go for a price too foolish to ignore. Anthea saw Saraphene's lashes flick down just once. It was the only sign she'd heard the lie. Halfway through supper, Dr. Greer leaned forward, elbows planted, eyes glued to Saraphene's face. Tell me, girl, he said, swirling his wine, what are you really? Not who, what? As if she were a strange creature that had wandered into his parlor. Saraphene smiled faintly. A person, sir. Greer's lips tightened. He wasn't satisfied. Answer properly. Anthea started to intervene, but Saraphene spoke first softly, clearly, without bowing her head. I am what every man here fears. Something he cannot buy twice. A hush swept the table. The men stiffened. The women's eyes narrowed, and Anthea felt her pulse quicken, not in fear but in awe. Saraphene had delivered the perfect answer. Too ambiguous to punish, too sharp to forget. Later, when the supper ended and the family dispersed, Anthea caught Saraphene standing alone by an open window, moonlight turning her hair into molten silver. You shouldn't antagonize them, Anthea whispered. Saraphene turned her head, profile calm and unreadable. I didn't. I only let them reveal who they are. Anthea swallowed. You're going to get in trouble. Saraphene looked at her fully then. Not cold. Not warm. Just seeing her. Would it trouble you if I did? She asked. Anthea hesitated, and Saraphene smiled. That is why they underestimate you, she murmured. You speak of danger, but you forget you stand beside it every day. Before Anthea could respond, Saraphene walked past her, down the hall, leaving a shiver in her wake. Saraphene wasn't in her assigned room. Anthea checked the halls, the parlor, the servants' quarters. Nothing. But when she stepped outside onto the rear veranda, she saw a shadow near the barn. Tall, poised, unmoving, Saraphene, standing barefoot in the dirt, face lifted to the night sky, hair loose and glowing like a pale flame. What are you doing out here? Anthea whispered, stepping toward her. Saraphene didn't turn around. Listening. To what? A pause. Then, in a voice so low, Anthea nearly doubted she heard it. To the past. It tends to whisper before it returns. Anthea froze. Part of her wanted answers. Part of her feared them. Saraphene finally turned, eyes shining like polished steel in the moonlight. Miss Marshall, she said, stepping closer, you should go inside now. Why? Because the people who bought me, her voice softened to something dangerous, do not realize I came here to finish what began long before they ever knew my name. And in that moonlit stillness, Anthea understood. Whatever Saraphene was hiding, whatever secret made her the most valuable woman ever sold, it was only beginning to show its teeth. The morning after the ruined dinner, Magnolia Grove carried a strange quiet, like the air before a storm. Servants whispered in corners. The overseer walked with a twitch in his jaw. And Daniel Ellerson, usually loud, smug, swollen with entitlement, moved through the halls with a stiffness that was almost fear. Almost. Because Celine had seen him look at her again, and she saw the truth flicker behind those eyes. Obsession renewed, not ended. She rose early, tying a simple scarf around her hair, pretending calm while her mind churned. Thomas had urged her to be cautious, his voice trembling with a worry she was trying not to carry. He ain't done, Celine, he warned. You embarrassed him. Now he wants to win. Celine knew he was right. Men like Daniel never let go, not of pride, not of envy, and certainly not of a woman they believed belonged to them. But Celine had no intention of letting him set the terms. Mid-morning, Miss Caroline intercepted her on the path to the kitchen, smiling too sweetly to be trusted. Daniel wants to see you in the west parlor, she said. You should go. It will be worthwhile. Celine held her face still. Yes, miss. As she walked toward the parlor, she replayed last night's moment, Daniel freezing when he realized the girl who set Savannah's men on fire had chosen someone else over him. The wound to his ego had been deeper than she expected, and now, whatever he planned, It was meant to restore his power. She stepped into the west parlor. Daniel sat alone, boots polished, coat crisp, posture sharp. He didn't even pretend politeness. "You made quite a fool of me at dinner," he began. My guests laughed. My sisters whispered. Even my mother questioned me. Celine lowered her gaze, letting him believe what he needed. "I didn't mean disrespect, sir." "Yes, you did," he snapped. "But it doesn't matter. I've decided how this ends." Celine's heartbeat quickened, but she kept her breathing even, her face soft. "Sir?" He leaned back, smirking. "I am sending you to Charleston, a private buyer. A man with more money than sense. He wants something rare, something unforgettable." His smile curled. "Something like you." Celine felt the floor tilt, but only inside. Her face remained untouched. Daniel continued, enjoying every word. "He'll pay enough that my mother can't object, enough that the entire county will know my judgment was right, that you were valuable, but never in control." A coldness settled under Celine's ribs. He was not just selling her. He was erasing the humiliation she had caused him. "How soon?" she whispered. 3 days. Maybe less. 3 days. 3 days before she was taken from the only man she had ever chosen. She let her shoulders sink just enough to satisfy him. "If that is what you wish, sir." Daniel's satisfaction lit his face. "Good girl. And Selene." His voice dropped. "I will visit you before you go. A farewell gift." Revulsion threatened to rise, but she buried it so deeply he never saw the flicker. She bowed her head, walked out, did not breathe until the door shut behind her. Outside, Thomas waited in the shade of the magnolia tree, eyes searching her face. "What happened?" Celine stared ahead, jaw tight. "He's selling me." Thomas froze. "When?" 3 days. A long silence. Then, with a voice she had never heard from him, quiet, fierce, breaking and rebuilding at once, he said, "I ain't letting them take you." She turned to him, startled by the intensity in his eyes. This was not the gentle Thomas who tended horses and read late at night. This was a man who had reached the limit of what he could endure. "Thomas," she whispered, "you must not." "I must," he said. "And I will. I ain't losing you across an ocean, across a state, across a coin purse." He stepped closer. "Say the word, Celine. Say you'll run with me. Say you'll fight. Say you won't let them break us." Her pulse hammered. Every choice was dangerous. Every path was a gamble with death. But the truth rose in her chest like fire. She would rather die running beside him than live being owned by a stranger. Still, running was not enough. Not when Daniel held the papers. Not when the auction was already arranged. Not when the buyer was expecting her. She touched Thomas's hand lightly. "We will not run." His face crumpled. "Celine." "No," she whispered. "Running is how slaves disappear quietly." Her eyes hardened. "We are not going quietly." Thomas stared at her. The fierce light in her eyes frightened and awed him at once. "Then what we do?" Celine lifted her chin, voice steady, controlled. "We take the buyer. We take the sale. We take Daniel's plan. And we turn it into his ending." Morning broke over Savannah with a heavy, breath-thick fog that clung to the alleys and riverfront like a veil over a corpse. The air smelled of brine, fresh sawdust, and the iron tang of chains, an aroma Amara had learned long ago to read like scripture. It meant the traders were awake. It meant wagons were being loaded. It meant accounts were being calculated, bodies sorted, prices rehearsed. It meant the auction was coming. She stood at the barred window of the holding quarters, back straight, hands clasped in front of her as though preparing to receive communion. Around her, the others trembled, some silently, some with the ragged sobs of people who had already begun burying themselves inside their own minds. No one spoke to her. No one needed to. In every shadowed face, she saw the same truth reflected. If Amara was being sold again, something catastrophic had shifted in the balance of Savannah's power. Because Amara was not just another enslaved woman. She was the one men whispered about, the one women watched with envy or fear, the one planters tried and failed to own completely. And today, she would be placed back on the block like a prize stallion whose reputation had grown too large to keep stabled. Footsteps approached, heavy boots, purposeful. The overseer's voice cut through the dim room. Amara. Out. She obeyed with serene precision, stepping into the corridor with the poise of a queen walking into court. Her wrists were shackled lightly, almost respectfully, but the symbolism was clear. Chains looked different on her. The overseers knew it. She knew it. Even the other slaves felt it in the marrow of their fear. She was a threat. As she walked, she kept her expression impassive, though her heartbeat pulsed like a drum hiding beneath silk. She had spent the entire night constructing a plan, a delicate arrangement of chances, instincts, and the quiet alliances she had forged in secret. Every piece had to fall in place. Every breath had to be measured. The corridor opened into the courtyard. She blinked against the sudden brightness. There, beneath a stripped oak, stood Caleb Jameson, the third largest slave broker in all of Georgia. A man known for ruthlessness polished into charm. A man who smiled like a gentleman and bought people like firewood. He turned when he saw her. "Amara," he said, tone silky with admiration. Savannah's rarest gem. She neither bowed nor averted her gaze. "Why am I being sold again?" Most slaves would never dare to speak so directly. But Amara had long ago discovered that men like Caleb valued what they couldn't easily tame, and she needed him to underestimate her conviction. He stepped closer, hands clasped behind his back. "Your former master made certain reckless decisions. Debts. Promises he couldn't keep. Unfortunately, you are part of the terms required to settle them." A lie. She knew it instantly. Debts didn't explain why he looked almost eager. It didn't explain the two guards positioned at the far gate. It didn't explain the presence of a lawyer she recognized, one hired only when a purchase involved enormous risk. Someone powerful wanted her. Someone who didn't want their name associated with her acquisition until the last possible moment. Caleb gestured toward the wagon. "Shall we?" Amara walked beside him. Every step a deliberate blend of dignity and calculated vulnerability. Men like Caleb liked believing they discovered the depth of her spirit themselves. It made them sloppy. As the wagon jolted forward, she allowed herself a single, drawn-in breath, not of fear but of readiness. The auction yard was already buzzing when they arrived. Buyers circled the platform like carrion birds. Conversations halted as Amara was escorted through the gates. Heads turned. Even those who pretended indifference stole glances. There were women whose beauty softened rooms. And then there was Amara, whose presence conquered them. Caleb whispered, "Your price may break the Savannah record." She didn't answer. Not because she was intimidated, but because she had just spotted him, a shadow beneath the auction canopy. Tall, immaculate, a man who watched her with the stillness of a loaded gun. Judge Nathaniel Mercer, her former master's oldest rival. A man who collected secrets the way other men collected land. A man who once offered her freedom if she would betray her own. Her stomach tightened. Because if he was here, then today's auction would not be about money. It would be about war. And she, Amara of Savannah, was the weapon. The spring sun rose over Savannah like a slow-burning ember, staining the river gold as it crept across the rooftops and wharves. The city looked unchanged, cotton bales stacked high near the waterfront, carriage wheels clattering over cobblestones, merchants bargaining in the market square, but beneath its polished veneer, something had shifted, something quiet, something permanent. Because of her, everyone in Savannah still spoke her name in lowered voices, as though saying it too loudly might call down judgment they were not prepared to face. Marietta, the woman too beautiful, too mysterious, too dangerous for their world to contain. Some swore she had been born under an eclipse. Others insisted she carried island blood that made her see storms before they formed. The men whispered she bewitched the mind. The women said she bewitched hearts. But none dared deny the simple truth. She lived free now, not as a fugitive, not as a runaway slave, but as a woman carved from her own will. And Savannah had never forgiven her for it. The news reports never mentioned her name directly, but everyone understood their meaning. A certain woman previously of auction notoriety. A yellow woman of unusual beauty believed to be traveling north. A dangerous influence who must be apprehended. Dangerous. Influence. Not for violence, not for crime, but because she had undone two of the city's most powerful men with nothing more than her presence and her refusal to be owned. Judge Rutledge's death was still spoken of in half-truths. The doctors blamed heart failure. His household blamed stress. Savannah society blamed the temptations of a certain slave woman. But there were a few, just a few, who knew the truth. And they never spoke of it aloud. Caleb had not returned to Savannah since the night the fire swallowed the Rutledge vineyards. Some claimed he fled to escape blame. Others believed he fled because he could not accept losing Marietta to freedom. Both were wrong. He had walked away because he wanted her to choose her life without the weight of his chains or her own. He wanted her to breathe freely for the first time, truly and fully, before she decided whether she wanted him in her world. Months passed with no word. Seasons shifted. Letters went unanswered, because none were ever sent. Yet he kept one promise. He never stopped searching for her, not to claim her, but to make sure she was safe. And when he heard rumors, first in Charleston, then in Wilmington, of a golden-skinned woman traveling with a small band of free blacks toward the north, his heart steadied for the first time in a year. She was alive, and she was choosing her own path. Whether he would be part of it was not his decision. The auction block where Marietta once stood became a site of perverse fascination. Buyers and traders stood on it as though absorbing something sacred or cursed. "One step here and you feel it," a trader muttered one afternoon, tapping the wood with his cane, "as if she's still watching you." But it was not her beauty that haunted them. It was their fear that someone like her, someone born at the very bottom, had unmade the men who believed themselves untouchable. In drawing rooms, women discussed her like a ghost story. She looked at you and you felt judged or forgiven. Another whispered, which is worse. No one dared speak the deeper truth. Marietta was the first slave woman they had ever feared, not for rebellion, but for her mind, her silence, her refusal to be anything but herself. And that terrified them more than bloodshed ever could. It was in Philadelphia, a cold, brick-lined safe house, that Marietta finally stopped running. Her hair had grown longer. Her scarred wrists were fading. Her eyes still held the depth of a woman who had survived both devotion and cruelty. She stood by a small desk, took a pen, and wrote a letter she knew would eventually find him. "Caleb, if you still seek me, come north, not to save me, not to claim me, but because I am ready to choose my life now. And I want to see whether it includes you." She signed no surname. She did not need one. The free woman she had become carried her own name, unbound, unbroken. Marietta. Just Marietta. It was enough. Some claimed she planned to travel farther north, to Boston, perhaps even to Canada. Others whispered she had joined a circle of abolitionist women teaching literacy to the illiterate. A few believed she was still in the South, waiting for the right moment to bring others with her, across the invisible threshold separating bondage from freedom. But no one knew for certain, except one man. Caleb arrived at the Philadelphia safe house weeks after the letter had been sent. When he read her words, he closed his eyes not from grief, but from a soft, quiet relief he had not felt since the night he carried her from the Rutledge estate. He looked north and smiled. As years passed, her story blurred into rumor and folklore. Some said she became a seamstress. Others said she ran a school for freed children. A few claimed she married a northern man and lived peacefully until gray hair softened the fire in her eyes. But the story that endured, the one even Savannah's most prideful families whispered, was the simplest. She lived, beautiful, unbroken, unowned, and when her name was spoken, it carried the quiet power of someone who rewrote her destiny in a world built to deny her one. Marietta, the most irresistible woman ever sold, because she could not be owned by anyone, not even the world that tried to claim her.